Welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and today I am hosting a special episode in Strasbourg, France, which is the home of the International Academy for Apologetics and Human Rights, led by Dr. John Warwick Montgomery and Craig Parton. This has been going on for 20 plus years or so now. I think we attended the 22nd year of the Academy. Pretty good guess. I'm getting indications that was a spot on guess.
That was a perfect guess. Yep.
This is my second year attending the Academy, and thankfully 1517 has been allowing me to continue some of my education through this Academy, which has been fantastic. And this year I brought along the recording equipment because I thought there might be an opportunity to record with fellow students at the Academy to see why people came, what they benefited from here, and what the apologetic task at home perhaps looks like for them, because the Academy attracts people from all different walks of life. There's pastors here, there's lay professionals. Dr. Parton talked about there being scientists who have come to this in the past and things like that, people in academic professions, doctors, businessmen. There's not really like a restriction on who could come. And we happen to have friends of 1517 coming this time along, and so I thought that would be a good opportunity to record. So I'm going to introduce the three people who will be joining me this episode. I'm joined by Grant Klambara. How are you doing, Grant?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Grant has worked with 1517 in helping us promote digital materials and conferences online. He's handled some of the upgrades to our email system, to Facebook pages and things like that. We have Dave Ruffner, who people may recognize the name on the show. We've mentioned you a handful of times in the show. You've inspired some episodes. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm well, thank you.
That's
good to be here.
That's good. And then we have again on the show for his second time on the show, Jacob Mueller, who's my good friend. And how are you doing, Jacob?
Doing well. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and you are going to be a second-year seminarian at Concordia St. Louis, right?
Correct. Second year.
So that's going to be, I think, the point of this episode for me is going to be hopefully interviewing you guys a little bit. I'm going to hopefully let you introduce yourselves just a little further to give people an idea of what you do sort of in your professional life, I guess, because you all have different vocations, as we would say at this point. So, Grant, you want to start off?
Yeah, definitely. So I live in Dallas, Texas. I'm actually a digital marketing consultant, which means more or less I help startup companies, nonprofits, e-commerce companies navigate the digital realm. So figure out how to advertise effectively, how to measure their performance, how to optimize their websites and test to find things that work and get rid of things that don't work. So that's kind of my daily work.
That's great. And so apologetics isn't really a career thing for you, right? This is something that you would be, or is it?
Correct.
Or is
no,
it?
I think that's accurate. Not a conversation that I'm having on a daily basis, at least with clients or people that I interact with through my work. So I think there was a handful of things that brought me here this time around. Doug Klambara and his wife Kelsey, who also both work for 1517. Doug's the creative director, and Kelsey is the editor of the blog. They came and attended last year and had a really good experience, and suggested that this would be something I might be interested in. So that was one of the main reasons, for sure.
Cool. Dave, why are you here this year, and what do you do?
Yeah.
I think we mentioned it a little bit.
Well, I'm here, and I'm going to first say I'm here with my wife, who also attended classes with me, with us, and so that's been great. But I am a parish pastor in Hudsonville, Michigan, at New Hope Lutheran Church. I'm actually this summer, though, on a 3-month sabbatical. Haven't been there in 9 years. They were very gracious to me. Extended time of rest with Megan and our family. But in the middle of all that is this opportunity to be here for the Apologetics Conference with the idea of, I suppose, gearing up, refreshing, but even more so for me, the apologetics task has taken on a larger and larger dimension for me as a pastor to parishioners in terms of with those in the faith. If catechetically we teach this is what we believe. With the apologetics task, then I get to answer the question for them, and maybe even more so for children, like our children growing up, answer the question, well, is there any good reason why we believe this, as opposed to that or nothing? So in the body of the faithful, I've seen growth for me in the need of it, and the need to become personally aware and acute and capable of knowing how to talk about that, share that with others. But also right along with that is outside the church, literally with my neighbors, or nearby to both our church and our home. We have a university of 25,000 kids. We have no, at least not yet, it seems to be happening right now, but no, in our case, Lutheran presence there. So we're not being a part of any solution or positive evangelical efforts there, evangelism efforts there. What would it look like to go there to be with students? And part of the answer to that question, what would it look like, is what would we take to them? What would we positively take and offer? And so it's this line of apologetics over these past years that's taught me that this offers not only the answer to give the unbeliever answers to their questions, but in the very same moment, the insistence of this apologetics on the person and work of Christ, of actually presenting to them the gospel, which by the Spirit is faith forming. That's why I'm here.
Cool. All right, Jacob. So you are a seminary student, right? And so what's your motivation for coming? You're obviously preparing for parish ministry, so some of your reasons might overlap with Dave. But why come along?
Yeah, I'm a full-time seminary student, but apologetics is not necessarily a focus in our classes there. And I definitely wanted to supplement that and pick up some knowledge somewhere else, some practical knowledge. I already see through my field work at a church, Reformation Lutheran in Afton in St. Louis, Missouri. I worked with some of the youth there, and I've already seen them asking questions and wanting to learn themselves how to talk to their friends at school. And I thought it'd be great to be able to pick up some of these skills and teach them and then learn myself while going through that process. And then also, I'm going to be a pastor, so all the time people ask me, why are you a seminarian, or why do you want to be a pastor? And that a lot of the time brings up conversations about the faith. And I talk to people of all backgrounds, so I thought it would be extremely useful.
It's good. Yeah, we gain a lot of new listeners throughout the months, and so it's been over, I think, a year and a half since we did our apologetics series on the show. And so for some listeners who have come along, it may not be, I think, immediately clear that one of the three pillars of what we do on the Thinking Fellows has been apologetics. Every month we try to do a topic that is somewhat apologetic. Lately that's been sort of representations of C.S. Lewis and his apologetic work on the show. In the past we've had direct apologetic questions, and we've also covered it sort of systematically through, I believe it was like 28 episodes overall that we did, and we all have now spent 2 weeks dealing with particular apologetic methods and problems that can be used when evangelizing or talking with family, friends, and even those in the faith who are having struggles. Are there any particular issues that stood out to you guys as the most, I don't want to say relevant because it sounds kind of kitschy, but that you think you've run into in the past that you now feel more prepared, or now you have considered those questions in a way where you think you could dialogue with people more comfortably? Grant, again?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the first classes or sessions that we had with Dr. Meister, we talked about the rise of the nuns, and
by nuns, we're saying N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, good clarification there.
Those people who maybe grew up in church or maybe didn't, but do not identify with any particular religious background.
Correct.
That doesn't
Yep.
mean they don't consider themselves spiritual or something like that, but they don't go to church.
Right. And a good portion of them do engage in religious activity in some capacity, but they are a growing group, especially for millennials. It's a big group of us in particular that have kind of fallen into this category. And so I think, one of the main characteristics here is the question of truth and how do we know anything is true. And I certainly think that was something we talked about this last week that was super relevant in the way that we're engaging with people. I think there's a lot of topics that we can look at apologetically and find the root answer in some objective truth. And I think that's something I'm certainly excited to get back to and build into kind of my conversations with people.
Yeah, I think I've noticed, I concur with you that I think questions of epistemology are some of the biggest challenges we face today apologetically. I think a lot of it has to do with education, and people have never sort of been forced to ask themselves the question, why do I know anything at all? Where did I get truth? Sort of, you maybe have things passed down from authority, like parents or in some cases churches and things like that. But then there's oftentimes a rebellion from that, right? A lot of the problems we face in the church today has to do with people who had the church was their authority growing up, and then at some point their own personal convictions conflicted with that authority, and they decided to sort of part ways, which is part of the problem of the nuns. And so I think dealing with the fact that there is some sort of objective truth that we can say, hey, maybe that thing you felt was wrong in the church is right, or maybe the church was right, but that you can't both be right, right? We've talked about the law of non-contradiction these past couple of weeks. I think that's very helpful.
Definitely. I think there's the misconception a little bit that science gives facts, religion gives mythology, and what we talked about this week, especially with the evidential, historical, legal, apologetic approach, is that we don't have to leave those in two separate categories. Those, in fact, that's the wrong way to look at this. There's evidence to the resurrection, and there's evidence to the things that we believe, and it's okay to lean into that and approach that from the aspect of truth.
Yeah, I'll just offer that, and this is what I've borrowed, received from really those who have gone before me, from Rod Rosenblatt to others. But I've got to tell you, pastorally, it is amazing how powerful it is, as a for instance, to have a batch of adults in adult instruction, adult catechesis, and to say to them, listen, when it comes to this place, if you ever hear me or anybody else suggest that you need to leave your brain in your car before you walk through the door, in that day, run from me, run from this place. Not just adults then, is either for young people to say that, permission to ask questions, to probe. And this is not a faith afraid of hard questions, good questions, quite frankly. That's thrilling to me. That's thrilling to me as a pastor. That's also thrilling to me as a father with kids now growing up in the faith. That this isn't such a closed circle, Dad, why do we believe it? And I say to them, because this is the faith, and this is why we believe. But rather, there is good reason as to why we believe this. And we can walk, again, my children through that, adults in adult instruction, interested in these things, or Grant, as you were saying, maybe the nun who's walked away from the church as well. Thrilling that the same goods are good for each of those three groups.
Great. Any other particular things that have popped up this week? We've done, I think, one of the big ones that we did an episode on the show, and I think it was the pastoral approach to this issue, but the problem of pain and evil seemed to pop up even after it was done, with a lot of questions from people throughout the week. Are you guys, any takeaways
Definitely.
there?
Yeah, I think there's certainly, well, that's a question that comes up a lot, which is, why do bad things happen to good people? And there is the belief that if God is good, then evil can't exist. And there's ways to approach that philosophically and find that, well, perhaps that's not necessarily true. Perhaps God can exist and evil can exist as well. But that, defense of God's existence doesn't necessarily get you closer to the cross yet. So I think building that positive case on top of that is just as important as addressing that. But it seems to me, at least, a lot of times that question comes from a an emotional place, and there's something rooted in that question. So the other important thing I think is just to listen to people, and we've talked about that a lot, but really figure out why they're asking a question when they do, and see if you can't get closer to the heart of that before diving into some apologetics.
Jacob?
He covered exactly what I was going to talk about,
There you go.
so we're good.
Yeah,
Well, let's just say it specifically. What is the gospel in this case for that person who is dealing with the problem of evil, not from a philosophical perspective, but having encountered it, as we all will if given enough time, or will again given enough time. And that's that, when evil, when pain and hardship and death enter in, those things don't disrupt an otherwise good life with God, or a world where this God can be, but rather we get the privilege to say from the vantage point of the cross, no, into a world of pain and suffering and death, God has now disrupted in Christ. And in a way is entirely at ground level, entirely in touch with their pain, a God who suffered in this way. And so really, it's the same gospel hopefully your listeners have heard on any given Sunday, and every Sunday, in fact. But we get to go there again and be reminded that it's not a tagline, it's not a happy wrap-up to a sermon, but it is the power unto salvation, and it is comfort for those in distress.
Yeah, so this academy is somewhat unique in that its center is on the evidential apologetic, with people who listen to our show. That is the approach that the Thinking Fellows has promoted on our show. Most of the book recommendations that we have suggested apologetically to come out of this tradition of apologetics, and I think there are lots of people doing this in some areas. But I think Lutherans in particular sort of have a strength here because of the Christocentric nature of our doctrine and our theology and the Christ-centered nature of this apologetic. The point is, in no matter what, whether it be problems of science, be it problem of evil, intellectual objections from philosophy and things like that, is to be able to reasonably respond to people with those while simultaneously moving them to the cross of Christ. Did you guys get that at all during this? Did you find that was actually what was happening? Because sometimes, there are people from the outside, particularly presuppositionalist apologetic methods, that would attack this for, say, relying on knowledge instead of faith in Christ. Did you find that was actually what came across when we were doing this in this style?
As a whole, yes. I think our take on apologetics, evidential apologetics, is even different than some other forms of evidential apologetics. So some others might start with something general like what is truth, and then build up to theism, and then point to Christ. But here with this academy, what we learned was pointing to Christ as God, and then through his resurrection, then building from there. So not only are you arguing and giving a reason for the hope that is in you, pointing to Christ, you're pointing to his gospel at the same time.
Anything else to add, guys? Is that what you had hoped for, expected, and got?
Yes. I've been dreaming of, in a way, coming to this academy for some time. We're here, and what do you find out? You find out it's that beautifully basic and focused, Caleb. It is. And we got that in spades while we were here. But it's also something that I received before coming here, which is very much, as you said, the core of what the Thinking Fellows, I think, has focused on in the past. And it's so true. Not only is Christ the evidential linchpin, but having unlocked it all, he now is the message of hope as well. So just as Jacob said, we're not sort of warming people up to theism and saying, okay, now that I've warmed you up this far, can I take you a few degrees further? that could be a lot of lost time, quite frankly. That could be the perception of bait and switch, or maybe the most successful you ever get that way is creating a monotheist of who knows what stripe. And you can be that monotheist of who knows what stripe and know nothing of the comfort of God in Christ.
I also think a lot of people today see the apologetic task as limited to, say, things like creationism and different scientific refutations, right? And I feel like people winning over that scientific argument is dangerous, because if the evidence you're using isn't essentially an argument from the deity of Christ confirmed in his resurrection, science changes, right? The whole world held that the center of our universe was the earth for a long time. And if you had, been able to refute that apologetically, and then science changes, the hope that somebody's establishing may change with it in particular instances, even philosophical arguments. When we did classes on that this week, we saw the evolution of various philosophical arguments through the ages. Particularly let's say like the ontological argument has gone through several revisions to match, new objections in philosophy. Well, if that is the center of your apologetic hope, right?
Not exactly the faith once delivered, never changing,
That's
the
right.
same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
That's right, yeah. Christ, that is not a changing object. That's something that happened in human history, an event that is unaltered. And so there's not a scientific methodology or a philosophy that would change the reality of those events if he actually died and rose from the grave.
Right. Yeah, in terms of talking with actual people, all of whom are wonderfully unique, the only thing I think this apologetic assumes of us, it doesn't assume so many gates that you must get through and so many subtopics to get to the main topic. It assumes primarily that you're going to take the person to the main topic at hand, Christ. Christ and him crucified and risen, hope of the world. And that way, it actually matches what our worship life should look like as well. It's Christ who brings you into the faith, and Christ who keeps you into the faith. It's central to the whole endeavor. So yes, we did take up fine-tuning. We did take up all kinds of scientific arguments, philosophical arguments, but never once was the suggestion, or is the suggestion given in this type of apologetic, that those are going to be your opening conversations. You might go there if the particular person you're talking with asks a question in line of that, but in all cases, you'll give the most winsome answer you can, but you still know that it's Christ that you
and I think even ultimately not our starting point, and especially not where we want to end.
Especially, right.
Especially because maybe a conversation gets picked up by somebody arguing that type of thing with you, but I think Dr. Manouche, who was one of our professors here this week, he's chair of the philosophy department at Concordia Mequon. I think he drove that home continually. These are tools. As a philosopher doing philosophical, and even he did medical apologetics with us. These are not things which you hope to argue unto themselves, but are transitionary to Christ. And that's sort of part of the task that I think here we were sort of left to figure out on our own. That may be something that I'm probably going to try to consider for the Thinking Fellows, how we can help contribute in this area, is connecting these different apologetic methods to bringing them to Christ. But that's ultimately the goal, right? Is to take any sort of objection, figure out how that stops somebody from believing that Christ raised from the dead, and then target that particular issue. And I think I don't know. I think that is the aim of the academy, and I think that came across. But with all things that are only 2 weeks in nature and kind of quick, right? This whole academy, you can't get to everything. So, is there something that you guys want to study more? You're going to read. You hope maybe there's podcasts or video resources on the horizon for you to help or to give congregation members. What else do you think you still need to do after this, in preparing to be able to give people an answer about your faith?
I think I'm certainly interested in looking into the literary apologetic method more than we did this last 2 weeks. I think again, bringing it to the context of kind of the millennial generation, where truth and real philosophical arguments don't always they may not be as effective as a narrative. And so, how do we produce more of the narrative that does contain the truth of the gospel in a way that people can approach it? How does that look, and where do we go there? Obviously, like you said, we can't cover everything in great detail in just 2 weeks, but that's an area, at least for me, I know I'm interested in digging in a little more.
Jacob, anything that you wanted to pick up on more when you get home? Books you think you might, topic-wise, want to start looking for?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to do is go back and reread my notes about 5 times, especially those medical ethics packets and the other packets that we received of notes from our professors, and just try to reprocess what we learned here. And then at the top of my list is actually going back and rereading a book I read before coming to the academy, which was Montgomery's Tractatus. I think I will have a much better understanding of what was going on and process that a lot better and probably reinforce what I learned here, which would be immensely helpful. And then, like you said, with literary apologetics, after we had that course, I really just wanted to go back and read the Chronicles of Narnia again. I haven't read it since I was a kid, and re-experience some of the imagery we have in there. I think that can be immensely helpful as well.
Yeah, I think my goal is certainly to digest this material all the more. Part of that for me is going to come in synthesizing it and looking for an avenue pretty quickly this fall to share with the congregation. Clearly, like adult Bible study, but really the longer term piece that I want to dig into, talk with others, reflect on myself, and try is how to figure out how, as a pastor, to get this actually regularly into the rhythm of congregational life, not sort of it's hot today and so we're on it, and then 4 years later you kind of find out the conversation went cold, the emphasis pastorally. So that's one of my goals.
That's cool. This episode is probably different for some of our listeners, right? We're not really covering one topic, but this is actually, I think, the second episode we're doing is kind of experiment of episodes of what it means to be a student. Jacob and I did one with my dad, and I think it's a lot of fun because I consider most people who are actively listening to this show are in some capacity students of theology, and that's not, I don't want to over talk what the Thinking Fellows is doing, but a lot of it is book recommendations, right? Further reading, continual study at their own churches and things like that. The goal of 1517 really is to provide theological materials for lay people and for congregations alike so that they can equip their members. One of the core elements of the Reformation was educating people, right? That's one of the major things that Luther identified as why the church lost the gospel, is because they stopped telling people what the gospel was, and they stopped teaching people about the scriptures, to read, to write, to communicate these things amongst themselves, and rely on a handful of people who then also forgot it. And so I hope this type of thing is beneficial to people who are not just talking on this show, but I do think it's helpful because, again, this is making me think the literary apologetic that I don't think we really did that on Thinking Fellows episodes, right? So this is a great thing for me to be able to say, all right, listeners, that's definitely going to be coming soon because now it's on my calendar, because we've done episodes on C.S. Lewis and things like that, but it really is a powerful apologetic. And so if you want to know more about that before we do a show on that, we sell Myth, Allegory, and Gospel, which it deals directly with this and talks about the work of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and sort of their ideas about how myth related to the real reality of the gospel and things like that. So I suggest those types of resources to people as well. And so in the heart of this being about being sort of a student of theology and taking this with you, do you guys have any books you would recommend for people after studying for this academy, being here and kind of making lists? I know the Tractatus already got mentioned, which is good. We've talked about that on this show before. Anything else that you'd like to add?
As much Lewis as you can handle.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, that's great. And so, yeah,
In
I think
particular, I mean, I'll jump in because I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan, but his science fiction trilogy, if you're looking for a good literary apologetic, is really fascinating. David, you pointed this out the other day, that we can, through these like science fiction, more literary approaches, talk about problems that are right on the edge of our kind of society or our where we're heading, at least in some ways, and dress it up in a way that the truth is there, but we can at least approach it and start to think through what are the implications of this. And so, I will second the C.S. Lewis recommendation there.
Absolutely. Great books. I'm also an oratory learner. I love hearing through the ear. So I'm going to point to you, and whether you want to add it to your show notes, one of the apologetics conferences that I think Dr. Rosenblatt and Craig Parton put on maybe a decade ago. It's like 8 to 10 hours worth of material. Certainly you could upgrade from there to the full Sensible Christianity, but if you wanted to get a shorter presentation of much of the same material, that particular audio sings to me every time I listen to it.
And that's for sale on the 1517 website, so I'll link that in the show notes as well.
Literally, get that for yourself. Give it as a gift somehow to somebody else. Make it happen.
Yeah, if you're interested in these kind of experiences and travel to Strasbourg is out of the question for you, which I know it is for most people, this is definitely something you can get without coming here. And I don't want to discount the experience of the Academy, and I do want to encourage people to support this by attending as long as it is occurring. But you can also get similar lectures from Dr. Montgomery, Parton, from those on the 1517 website. We try to support these initiatives as much as possible by keeping that material that they've published in the past available and revamped. We've redone the covers on a lot of that stuff, so it doesn't look as ancient as it perhaps was in the past and things like that. And I think it's digestible. And then again, I want to say, if you have apologetic questions that you would like us to take a look at on this show, please look at our apologetic library, see if there's anything that we have addressed in the past episodes. But if there is something really unique that you'd like to hear, or you think, hey, you guys did a good job in 40 minutes, but I really think you need to revisit this because you missed something, please send us an email. I would love to hear that. I've gotten plenty of ideas attending this academy, talking to people attending here, even just in this episode. I've realized some things that we can pick up and do, which I think is one of the real benefits for me being able to come to here. But any closing remarks from you guys?
I think I'd just like to sum up what truly is the core of it as I understand it. And we're going to get to the same spot, whether it's through the literary apologetics. We're talking with somebody who initially has a question of cosmology for us. If we're aiming for Christ, what is it we have to share that's really wonderful, that, quite frankly, I did not grow up knowing? And I've got it here in my notes before me that, listen, these New Testament documents, these firsthand accounts of Christ and his life, his claims, these documents are reliable. In these documents, Christ makes claims about himself, but then finally, here's the part that sings, and it's going to sing for your listeners. 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ isn't risen from the dead, your hope is in vain, but people, there's good reason to trust, and as Dr. Rod says, put all the chips on the rock solid foundation that Christ is risen. He therefore is who he said he is, and he has accomplished by his death and his resurrection what he said he would, and his promises that still stand for us concerning today and each of the days to come in our life, and the promise of new life after these bodies die. Those promises are rock solid.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode, guys. It was fun to talk about learning apologetics and really becoming a student of our faith. And so, thank you for joining us on this episode, and we'll catch you next time.